Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for our third live AMA here at Unbounce. If you've attended any of our other webinars, then you know that this is a reasonably new format for us. It's something that we're just trying out. And we really appreciate your feedback as we go through today's half-hour session with Danny and Ross from LemonStand. So you'll see just right next to the video here, there's the Twitter stream. So go ahead and share your comments with us using the hashtag Unwebinar. You can share questions, feedback, participate in conversations with everyone else. We really just appreciate you getting involved and participating. Helps us know that you appreciate the work that we're doing. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to be going through a number of questions today, and these are all questions that were submitted ahead of time when people registered for the session. So anyway, my name is Ryan Ingley. I'm the VP of Customer Experience here at Unbounce. Once again, really appreciate having you here with LemonStand CEO, Danny, and then our VP of Growth, Ross Paul. I didn't want to pronounce your last name unless I screwed up. So it was Danny. Halarewich, got it. That was close to what I would have guessed. Yeah. So they're here to share some of their battle stories, tips, experience, working in CRO, conversion rate optimization using Unbounce. So we're going to chat successful A/B tests they've run, and then some of the strategies and methods they've used for optimizing their landing pages. So Danny here is founder and CEO of LemonStand. So he's worked with hundreds of online retailers to create high-performance e-commerce websites that stand out from the crowd and help convert visitors into buyers. So previously, you run a web agency where you led marketing, design, and development. Mm-hmm. So that's like everything. Yeah, I was going to say that's like SaaS triple threat. got it. The full stack. So with companies such as Telltale Games, Yahoo, and MasterCard, which is super impressive. And then Ross, so VP Growth at LemonStand. Obviously, you would be like the expert on CRO today, so I'll probably be leaning on you a ton for that.
All right.
Yeah. So you've got more than 20 years of executive experience driving and executing growth strategies for e-commerce, software and SaaS businesses, from small bootstrap startups to big international, publicly traded multinationals.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I'm in a startup now, and I have to say, that's where my heart is.
Yeah, it's a way different experience, different culture. Right before we started, we were kind of chatting about, even within a startup, the differences when you are 5, 6, 7 people up to 50, 100 and more. So you have all that experience under your belt. So you're also an investor and advisor in a number of SaaS startups in Canada, the UK. Began as co-founder and CTO as Onvia, an e-commerce startup that went public in 2000.
Yeah, long ago in the big crazy .com era.
Solid. So
before my hair turned gray.
So between the two of you, this is like CRO, e-commerce, SaaS powerhouse. So I think everyone here will get a lot of value from what we're going through. Before we get started, just to give a little bit of context, obviously we're talking about conversion rate optimization, but you are using it at LemonStand. So Danny, as founder and CEO, do you want to give us a little bit of background on LemonStand?
Yeah, sure. So LemonStand is a e-commerce platform for fast-growing online retail brands. And we work a lot with also the web agencies who build custom online stores for these retailers. So our platform really focuses on being able to customize the entire shopping experience, including the checkout. So that includes being able to optimize the checkout and A/B test it and things like that.
Solid. So I mean, if you're you have A/B testing built into your platform to optimize the full checkout experience. So A/B testing is something you'd be, super familiar with. You guys.
Yeah, well, it's something you can implement. So you could use a tool like Optimizely or something, a visual website optimizer with LemonStand.
Gotcha.
What kind of makes LemonStand different is that the checkout, you have the ability to do that, whereas on a lot of other platforms, it's kind of locked down and you don't really have that control. So LemonStand kind of gives you the control to A/B test it.
Awesome. And I mean, those sort of micro conversions along the way lead to pretty big wins. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with e-commerce.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so let's dig into some of the questions that have been submitted. As we get started, let's go way back to the beginning and find out, kind of Russ and Danny, I'll shoot this one over to both of you. But how did you get started with A/B testing? And do you remember your first test you ran at LemonStand?
Yeah, so for me, the first test I ran at LemonStand was for a pretty old version of our website now. It was actually back when we had kind of a different version of LemonStand. It was pre SaaS days for us. And so basically what I was trying to figure out as a founder was I was basically testing a business hypothesis. It was, which customer group was better for us. And for us, that was, should we have messaging focused on the merchant or the developer? And so I found Optimizely at the time, and it was the first time I used it. And so I basically coded up a different version of the homepage, and I tested kind of like a wildly different page against each other. And so that was kind of my first foray into it. And it was really exciting because it wasn't just a test to see, which group clicked more on a certain button or something like that. It actually kind of showed me which group of customers was better for my business, and it taught me a lot about LemonStand and how we need to bring the product to market.
We actually have quite a few like startups and entrepreneurs who use Unbounce for like a very similar reason, like testing and validating business ideas, which, like you say, it's not, that angle of conversion rate optimization. It's not optimizing for purchase, but it's totally validating your business idea. And in the end, what did you wind up learning from it?
Well, it's still something we're actually kind of working on, but we definitely learned that developers were kind of a better market for us, and they kind of resulted in more ultimate customers. So yeah, there was kind of some interesting stuff we learned there, that the different customer bases would normally convert at different rates. So merchants would tend to sign up for a trial more readily, but they didn't necessarily turn into customers as well. So gotcha. and weren't as successful with the product as well. So
gotcha. So validating business ideas. What about optimizing for marketing?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start from where I first started doing A/B testing, because it was a long time ago.
Okay. Bring it on.
So it was back before things like tools like Unbounce and Optimizely existed, and so it was doing really basic things like AdWords, kind of pay-per-click type kind of conversion testing, A/B testing of different ad copy and things like that. It's been great over the last 5 to 7 years. I think Unbounce was born 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yeah, just about 7.
That all these tools have kind of come into our world to make life so much easier, because 10 years ago you could test the top of the funnel, but it was really hard to test the bottom of the funnel, which is where the money comes. So something that I've been doing recently with LemonStand is we've been doing some competitive experimentation where we've tried to take the whole funnel all the way from the top, something like an AdWords, through to driving trial conversions, through to then measuring conversion to purchases, and then ultimately retention. And we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the demographics of who's most likely to succeed with our platform. Danny mentioned that more often than not, it's more serious retailers who are trying to do more advanced things, and they tend to be working with web agencies who have expertise in doing more advanced things. And so we actually have learned that we get a much higher MRR per customer, so much higher monthly revenue per customer, and our retention and lifetime value of the customers is 3 to 5 times higher than if they don't fit into that category.
Right. Huh. Now, so you've got conversion rate optimization set up at various stages throughout the funnel, like from top of funnel all the way through to trial start, and then, like you said, retention and presumably growth afterwards. Unbounce is a landing page builder, and in your company, you're like Unbounce powered users, and so we typically focus on landing page optimization. So can we dig in a little bit to how you first got started using landing pages?
Yeah, I think for me it was for something really simple. It was an ebook, I believe. I can't remember which one now, but I think another one of the early uses I used it for was for testing a feature that didn't actually exist yet in LemonStand. But so I wanted to see
market research.
Yeah, exactly. Using it for market research, but it allowed me, to kind of validate whether there was a demand for that feature or not. But also build, a mailing list. The feature we did end up building it as for a subscription e-commerce feature, and then we kind of were able to notify those customers when it was available. So it did kind of result in new trials and customers, but just down the line once the feature was actually there.
Yeah, and the great thing about that as well is while you're validating the feature use, you're also developing the list that you can market to afterwards. So you're like good to go there. Ross, over to you. How much, were you involved with, some of the initial tests there?
Well, I'll actually talk a little bit about before LemonStand, where I was doing more kind of enterprise software.
Okay.
And we were using landing pages for gated content, which typically helped us to build our email nurture list.
Yeah.
And then really trying to drive increased activity by sort of publishing bottom of the funnel content to score, basically lead score up our initial leads, and eventually try to drive some kind of a call to action, which is speak to a salesperson, request pricing, something where we'd hand it off to a sales team. LemonStand is a little bit different because we're kind of inbound marketing driven and we don't have a sales team, at least not yet. We all do a little bit of sales.
Yeah.
So with us, we're again using it for gated content, right? So ebooks and webinars and those kinds of things to help build our audience and then drive them down the funnel. But the call to action is to try the product and then obviously eventually convert to a paying customer.
Gotcha. And one really common question that we get from people who are trialing Unbounce or even Unbounce customers is like, how much is there a certain traffic threshold that you get to when you're like, okay, you know what, we actually have to be smarter about CRO and run some of our traffic through to landing pages so we're delivering the right message?
Yeah, so I guess our philosophy is it's important to always be critical of what you're doing. And we don't have a lot of traffic. We're still a relatively small startup. So when we do CRO, we primarily focus on making big changes that we think are going to radically change the conversion rate versus trying to make incremental, a whole bunch of incremental changes to sort of optimize the conversion rate. And probably secondarily, we try to look at the funnel a little bit more holistically. So if we do make a change that we think is going to, for example, drive a much higher percentage of trial conversions, then we also want to look at, well, how many of them actually convert into customers? Because if we make a change that generates a lot of trials, but no new customers, it was not a good change.
Right. And what sorts of analytics do you use to track that whole journey?
Well, so first of all, we use the basic out-of-the-box Unbounce reporting, which is a good starting point. We use Google Analytics, so we plug Google Analytics in so that we can look at things like time on page. We can slice conversion rates by device, or other demographic, geography, other demographics. And then we're using some funnel analytics from Heap.
Okay.
So Heap it's kind of a newer analytics tool that is got an interesting approach, and they allow you to do some sort of funnel analysis, similar to what maybe Kissmetrics or someone like that.
Gotcha. Now you said that because you don't have a ton of traffic.
One last thing, we have experimented a little bit with crazy egg and heat mapping, but we're such a small team that if we spent all our time analyzing, and we'd have no time to do. So we're trying to keep things as simple as possible. I think as we get bigger, I think that becomes, you start to do more incremental optimization, and when we have more resources and more traffic, then I think tools like that become more applicable.
Yeah, it's very easy to wind up in full analysis paralysis. We see it all the time. People get obsessed with data, and sometimes you just gotta move.
Yeah,
you just get it done. Now you said that because you don't have necessarily as much traffic as a bigger company, that you test fairly big changes on your pages rather than incremental changes. And I would say kind of the reigning wisdom is test one thing at a time so that you can attribute any changes in conversion rate to that one element. So you're going rogue and you're saying, no, big changes.
Not necessarily, no. I guess when I say big changes that we think are going to have a big impact on the page. So it could be, so we tend to stay away from things like button colors, right? Because that's probably going to have an incremental change, not necessarily a radical change. So we may change the number of form fields on a form, which can increase or decrease qualification and can radically change your conversion rate, but it's only one change. Or we might change the headline. One of the things I was telling you off air recently was that one of the founders one of the co-founders of Unbounce was kind enough to let us play around with dynamic text replacement, which isn't included in our plan. And so we basically inserted dynamic text replacement to increase ad relevance, and saw a 40% increase in conversion.
Can you give a quick overview of what DTR, dynamic text replacement, would do.
Okay.
You don't have to sell the feature. It's okay. I'm not trying to like plug it here.
We have
Just so people know what it is.
Yeah,
doing
we
on
love
the page.
dynamic text replacement. So basically what it allows you to do is have an element or elements on your page that can be dynamically generated. So you could pass a URL parameter that, for example, would tell the page what headline to display. And that's actually what we used it for, was to dynamically change the headline to make them relevant to the ad copy. And it had a very big impact on conversion rate. But we do tend to try to make sort of one, maybe two changes at a time, but our focus is on, do we think this is going to have a big impact? Because if it's not, we're probably not going to waste our time doing it.
Gotcha. Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, like as a founder, I probably have a little bit of a different perspective, that I'm constantly thinking about, kind of the bigger questions about the business as a whole, around go-to-market and things like that. So that's, I guess, why I kind of focus on making big changes. How I try to think of it is, the results of the test should really tell you something. It should either be, wildly successful or fail miserably. When you have those very small incremental changes, sometimes it's really hard to tell, what the result actually was of that, and it's hard to take kind of action from that to move forward. So I tend to, focus on the crazy ideas, and not filter them out too much, and just go and test them and see what happens.
I think that's a stage of company thing too.
Mm-hmm.
When you're big, you've got lots of traffic. You've kind of got the basics worked out. There's more experimentation.
You assume so.
I think you tend to have more experimentation at the bottom of the funnel for incremental improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we're in the experimental stages, we're kind of early product market fit. There's a lot of things we're still testing. So we tend to be more radical in our testing.
Well, one thing actually that I tack onto that is we tend to see with a lot of much larger customers that businesses, and I'm talking like very big enterprise companies, will have like little startup units within their companies who run like a very similar way, as you. So yeah, there are teams that are focusing on optimizing a strategy that is generally proven, but there are still units just trying radically different things the way, it sounds like you guys are doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I always ask myself too, like, what am I going to learn from the results of this test? Changing the button color. If red converts better than green, what does that tell you? It tells you nothing at all. Nothing that you can, glean action from. You could go around your website and make every single button on your website red, but that's probably unlikely to actually work. And so I try to stay away from small kind of incremental optimizations like that.
So saying, go for bigger changes that you suspect will have a much larger impact than something small and fairly innocuous. But given that, I mean, how do you decide what you are going to test for significance? Like you mentioned forms, things like headlines. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so I'd say some of the big things that we'll test on landing pages specifically will be definitely the headline, definitely the form, visuals, the big visuals, not necessarily the small ones. The big impactful image visuals. What else? Those are three of the big ones, and I think also form length.
Mm-hmm.
To some degree, form length is a qualifier, right? Yeah. So I was saying this to Danny earlier. I really like the Unbounce for agencies landing page because it's really, really long and detailed, and the call to action's at the bottom. And so you kind of have to make an investment to get there. And if you make an investment to get there and actually act on the call to action, that's a qualifier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're probably getting better traffic, even if you're getting less of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting better conversions by doing that. And so I think form length is probably another one that we would.
Well, I mean, this goes back to what you were saying earlier, where maybe, well, actually, I think this was off air. Now I kind of forget. But we were talking about optimizing for conversion at the top of the funnel and how, yeah, you might get like a 40% lift in conversion. However, if you don't see that, like a lift further down the funnel or a lift in revenue, then that conversion improvement doesn't really mean anything. So with form length is one that we talk about all the time, where obviously, like if you reduce number of form fields to 1 and say just capture email address, yeah, your conversion rate is probably going to climb massively. But let's say you add 4 or 5 more fields to better qualify the leads, you may still wind up with like, better leads going through and more revenue in the end, yeah. Which is why you got to set up the tracking to go all the way through the funnel.
Exactly. And you have to think about the cost of those leads. If you're sending bad leads through your funnel, who's dealing with them, right? So if you got a
The
sales
giant
team,
support team that
you
you
got a
have
sales
to pay.
team, you've got a sales team, for example, if you're handing off bad leads to the sales team, that's not going to do very much for the marketing relationship with sales, right?
Yeah.
If you're generating trials, you're just generating a support headache for your support team if they're not well qualified trials.
Yeah. Now, going back to A/B tests and your A/B testing methodology, another question that we get all the time, which I am not surprised to see on here, is how long do you run A/B tests for, or how many visitors, et cetera, do you have to have before you can select a champion?
Yeah. Well, so we'll start with kind of our kind of process for doing this, where we've actually kind of taken a process that's espoused by Sean Ellis from Growth Hackers and Qualaroo and a few other startups, and it's really kind of like an agile testing methodology. Our approach is to do kind of like 1 week testing sprints, and in some cases a test may last more than 1 week if there's not enough data in order for us to get any level of confidence. But we tend to shy away from those because if we can't test it quickly to really understand what's happening, we got to ask ourselves whether we could be testing something else where we would learn more quickly. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions to that. There are things that take longer to run. But yeah, our goal is to run things in a week or less if possible. And then for really strategic experiments that might take longer because we need a larger sample size, we'll extend those. But anything that's going to take us months to test at our stage of a business just doesn't make business sense for us.
Yeah. It's funny, I was just talking to somebody about this last night who was saying, I think he was reading an article about Google and how, obviously they have the most traffic ever. So, they can funnel something like 1% of their traffic to a test for 2 hours and reach validity. Whereas for companies like us, it takes way, way, way longer. And the differences in conversion rate have to be so much bigger to reach validity as well. Now, I have a question about kind of the testing culture. This wasn't one that was submitted, but I'm going rogue. I'm asking my own question here. So you had mentioned testing sprints, which makes it sound like there is a pretty solid testing culture built in at LemonStand versus just like ad hoc testing. Danny, is that something that you helped set up? Like,
it was kind of Ross and I together. Okay. One thing before Ross got there, it was pretty ad hoc. We were just sort of testing random things. We had a lot of different tests going on. And it was really hard to suss out, what was working and what wasn't. And if something, did work well, is really hard to figure out, down the line what impact that had on the funnel because we didn't really have proper analytics set up either. And so, we still keep things pretty simple. We're still a relatively small team. So, the process is still simple, but, Ross did implement some more process around that. Kind of following Sean Ellis and his guidelines.
Yeah, I think we're not trying to create a bunch of overhead.
Right.
We just want to be a little bit more systematic and strategic about spending our efforts in the right places at the right times and measuring the results so that we learn and that we share the learning across the team. Good thing is it's a really small team, so it's pretty easy to share the learning.
Yeah, you basically just say something out loud and everyone else in the company is up to speed. That's how it goes. Now, would you say that the process that you implemented, is that, something that you kind of developed yourself just through experience, or if anyone was interested, do you have resources that you would point people to? You mentioned Sean Ellis if you can.
Yeah, I mentioned Sean Ellis because I think I really like the kind of the methodology. In fact, here's another shameless product plug. Sean Ellis has got a startup that he's doing, which has actually got a growth experimentation kind of process management tool. I would say we're probably on the small side of the target demographic, and you could do it with a Trello board just as easily or something like that.
Trello best.
But I think we really do like the methodology because it forces you to kind of create a repetitive process for everything from brainstorming new ideas for experiments to prioritizing them, to implementing them, to measuring them, to learning from them, and then to, if they work, operationalizing them.
And to review, how many people are there at LemonStand?
There's 9 of us.
There's 9 of us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, another thing that I tend to hear from kind of potential customers, attendees at these kinds of sessions, is that A/B testing is something that can only be implemented when your company is a particular size because it requires a lot of time and energy and effort. But I think you guys are proof that like if you make it part of the culture early on, it can have a really significant impact.
Yeah.
From like market validation, then of course through to optimizing your business.
Yeah, and if you want to look up that resource that we kind of use to craft our testing culture, if you just Google high tempo testing, maybe add Sean Ellis to the end of that or something, you should find he has some presentations.
Yeah, there's
and
some really
articles.
good. He's got some good webinars on it. I think there's an ebook as well.
Okay, that was high tempo testing.
High tempo testing.
Don't search it right now. Stay focused on this page. You can search for it afterwards. Make a note.
And there are definitely other methodologies that are very similar. There's lots of resources out there.
Got it.
And they don't have to be over-engineered. There's even some great sample Trello boards on this kind of stuff. So
perfect. Back to Trello. So good. Love Trello. Let's talk landing pages. I'm curious to know, what is the most successful, in your marketing campaigns, what's the most successful landing page you've built for one of your campaigns? What does it look like, and what was its purpose?
It was probably the ebook that we did for A/B testing for e-commerce retailers.
Okay.
And so that was an ebook that we spent quite a bit of time putting together. We got a lot of other people involved, like Pep Laja and folks like that. And so we wanted to have as much impact as we could to get that out there. And so we actually, to be honest, we kind of borrowed inspiration from Unbounce's ebook landing page because they're really good. So we definitely use that as inspiration, but we made some of our own tweaks to it and kind of A/B tested it over time as well. I think we A/B tested different cover images too because it was such a big focus of the page,
right?
And things like that. So that was probably the most successful one. I think that probably had some of the highest traffic to it as well because we promoted it quite a bit compared relative to the other ones that we've done.
And you probably have good traction now from it, good SEO. I would imagine it continues to convert for you. Yeah,
it still continues to convert. It's getting some SEO traffic for sure. And we link to it from our blog and things like that. We do have a new ebook now that we're kind of promoting a little more heavily. We usually kind of promote one ebook at a time, but it's still out there. People are still downloading it.
Now, Ross, do you know, so far is it performing well? Is it just that the page itself converted well, or were you able to measure that through to actual impact on business?
The page itself, I think, converted pretty well because it's so detailed and sort of technical how-to. It's almost like an immediate qualifier. Nobody's going to download and read that thing if they're not really trying to solve serious e-commerce
they are in your target
problems,
market segments,
right?
Yeah.
So it definitely has translated into more qualified trials and customers.
Good. Now, your own most successful landing page aside, do you have a best landing page you have ever seen, or a favorite marketing campaign?
I really like the landing page from a company called Intercom. Their product management ebook landing page is really good. And it's kind of funny, it looks beautiful, but there's definitely some things of it that, for example, if it went on Page Fights, there's probably a bunch of things that would get picked on.
Oh, if anything were on Page Fights, it would everything would get picked on.
For sure. But there's kind of some obvious things, but for that page, it works. And I think it just kind of goes to show there really aren't any rules. Because I lead product at LemonStand, I'm their target market for that ebook, and it just spoke to me immediately. And the visuals are just really good, and it's also really consistent with their brand, which is important because I had already kind of built trust in their brand from using their product, but also from their blog and other content. So because it was consistent, that helped. For me, that's a really good example. It's the Intercom's Guide to Product Management ebook landing page.
I'd agree with you, and I would comment, even if you aren't in product specifically and you don't have need for a tool like Intercom, they just do a phenomenal job of product marketing and marketing in general.
Yeah, really
very, very cohesive experience, kind of end to end. Over to you, Russ.
Yeah, so I mentioned, I wouldn't say it's my favorite of all time, but it's my favorite today, which is the Unbounce for Agencies landing page. I mentioned it. We're a big part of our growth strategy right now is agencies. We think that's how we can grow faster. I talked a little bit about that, and I just like a lot of the elements there. Really strong value proposition, great validation from other agencies. Got to invest a little bit to kind of get to the call to action, So by the time you get there, you're probably pretty qualified as someone who would be, a good agency customer or partner for you guys. And I think we've got room for improvement there. So I'm sort of using it as inspiration a little bit.
Actually, I have a kind of follow-up question to that, because you said you are using it maybe as a bit of a model to test out on your own. When you implement your tests, are they just hypotheses that you develop on your own, or is there a certain amount of research that goes into it to make sure that you're just figuring out what people's problems are on the pages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies. I mean, we do a lot of kind of customer development and partner development research, so things like persona development, and to really try to understand, the needs and motivations and pain points of our target. And so that definitely influences anything we do in terms of messaging or visuals or even channels that we choose to market on. And then we also, we take the learning from past landing pages and campaigns that we've run and try to sort of apply that to what we're trying to do as context. But at that point, creativity kicks in, and more often than not, when we start with a landing page, we start with one. We don't start with two. We start with one, which is our best guess at what we think is a good landing page. We gather some data, and then we start to test and optimize.
Awesome.
Yeah, one thing that I think is good for companies that have a lower amount of traffic is to just take a look at the content that's out there, from places like the Conversion XL blog and even the Unbounce blog, places like that, and just kind of get to grips on best practices. I think Pep calls it heuristic analysis, and just kind of using that to tear down your own page. And so you can kind of start with a good best guess, and then get a baseline, and then test from there.
Yeah, good stuff. So we've got to wrap things up here. I have 2 questions left that we're going to go through. I'll give you a minute to think about one. One, if you could leave everybody with like one piece of advice in regards to kind of landing pages or CRO, what would it be? But before we get into that one, while you're thinking about it, if you had to fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses, which one would you choose and why?
Well, I'll go first, I guess. I would definitely go for the horse-sized duck.
Okay.
100 little horses, I guess it would be 400 little hoofs coming at you. Just doesn't sound fun at all.
100 of anything is gross. So,
I'd pick the horse-sized duck because ducks are wimps.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not like a water battle, because I suspect
That's true.
I would change my.
If it were a goose, I might actually choose the horses, but it's a duck.
Agreed.
Geese are mean.
I hate
You
geese.
could just like lure it with loaves of bread into a pit of 100 duck-sized horses, and they take care of it for you.
All right, so there's some fighting advice if it ever comes up for you. But back to kind of CRO landing pages, what would you want everybody to know kind of going away from here? If there was like one nugget.
For me, I think it would be, think about what you're trying to accomplish with your business, not just with the landing page. Because if you focus on a landing page or a specific part of the funnel and you forget about the rest of it, then you're maybe not going to have the impact on the business that you're trying to have, and you're spending your time in the wrong places.
Yeah, kind of just to build on that. I mean, don't be afraid to test kind of radical things that could, fail miserably or wildly succeed. I'd say do that, especially if your traffic is not too high, and always ask yourself what you're going to learn from the result of a test. So testing a color of a button, it's probably not going to teach you too much about your business or the motivations of your customers. Then probably skip that and do something else.
Awesome. Good stuff, guys. So Danny, Ross, thanks so much for joining us today for, again, our 3rd AMA. If you have any feedback for us about the session, like I said, please share it on Twitter, #Unwebinar. If you are involved in e-commerce at all, I encourage you to check these guys out. It's a great service, and we've heard really great feedback from customers who've worked with them as well. And then, of course, Unbounce. If you're building landing pages for your marketing campaigns, we can help you out with that and make sure that you get the results that you need. So that's that. Thanks, everybody. Please stay tuned. We look forward to inviting you to one of our other upcoming sessions, and happy marketing.